No one builds something like this alone. Benjamin smiled, and the ballroom answered with warm applause. Then his eyes found Rebecca. She looked back without hesitation. After 11 years of marriage, she knew that look. It was the quiet pause that always came before he said something meant only for her. Benjamin took a slow breath. "Before I finish." Rebecca's fingers loosened around the stem of her champagne glass. "I'd like to thank every employee who stayed when we weren't sure we'd make it." The room applauded again. Benjamin smiled. Then he thanked someone else. Rebecca smiled too. Then another. Somewhere between one thank you and the next. Her smile faltered as she waited for her name, but it never came. Nobody noticed. Benjamin never looked in her direction again. When the room rose for a standing ovation, Rebecca stood with everyone else. She slipped off her wedding ring, rested it beside an untouched slice of anniversary cake, then gently folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. It looked less like someone leaving, and more like someone making sure she hadn't disturbed anyone. Benjamin stayed where he was, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, smiling for photographs. Then, almost without thinking, he looked toward their table. He expected to find Rebecca smiling back. Instead, an empty chair, her wedding ring, 2 untouched glasses, the anniversary candle still waiting to be lit. For the first time that night, Benjamin forgot every word of the speech he'd worked so hard to remember. Welcome to Greer Stories, where the smallest moments often become the ones people spend the rest of their lives trying to understand. Tonight's story isn't about the standing ovation everyone remembers. It's about the quiet goodbye almost no one noticed, until it was far too late. The first thing Benjamin asked every Thursday wasn't about work. "Did we beat last week's grocery bill?" Rebecca looked up from the kitchen counter, still wearing her navy blue hospital scrubs. She held the receipt between 2 fingers like it contained classified information. "Barely." Benjamin grinned. "How much?" "If I tell you, you'll start celebrating." "I deserve to celebrate." "You saved 83 cents. Benjamin placed one hand over his heart. 83 cents is the beginning of financial freedom. Rebecca laughed so suddenly she had to lean against the refrigerator. "You've officially spent too much time around spreadsheets." "I own a logistics company." "You own stress with invoices." "I prefer entrepreneur." "I prefer husband." Without another word, she crossed the kitchen and kissed him on the cheek before returning to the stove. That was how most evenings began, not with grand romantic gestures, with unfinished conversations that picked up exactly where yesterday had ended. Their apartment sat on a quiet street outside Charlotte. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should. The bedroom window rattled whenever heavy rain passed through. One cabinet still refused to close unless someone nudged it with a hip. Benjamin had promised to fix it. Rebecca had stopped reminding him. Instead, every time she walked past it, she'd bump it shut herself. Benjamin always noticed. "One day, I'm fixing that." "You've been saying that since spring." "I've been busy." "You've been avoiding it." "I've been strategically delaying it." She smiled. "It still doesn't close." "No, but somehow we're still married." "Barely." She pointed the wooden spoon at him. "Careful." He raised both hands. "I apologize to the cabinet." She laughed again. Those tiny exchanges had become part of the rhythm of their marriage. Neither of them realized how many invisible rituals they had collected over 11 years. Thursday nights belonged to numbers. After dinner, the kitchen table disappeared beneath envelopes, receipts, coupons, and a worn spiral notebook with future written across the front in black marker. Benjamin always opened the notebook. Rebecca always uncapped the pen. Neither of them remembered when they'd started doing it that way. It simply became theirs. Benjamin scanned the electricity bill. Rebecca reached for the calculator. "It's missing." He looked under yesterday's mail. "Again?" "You borrowed it." "I absolutely did not." "It's in your laptop bag." "It is not." Rebecca walked over, unzipped the front pocket, and held it up without saying a word. Benjamin stared at it. "I was testing you." "No, you weren't. I wanted to make sure you still knew where everything was." I'm married to you. I know you lose things professionally." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair." She shook her head, smiling to herself as she sat back down. The numbers mattered, but somehow they never mattered more than the people sitting on either side of the table. Some months they finished with $20 left. Some months they finished with none. Whenever they had a little extra, they celebrated exactly the same way. 1 cinnamon roll, never 2, always 1. Benjamin insisted it tasted better when they shared it. Rebecca insisted he only said that because it was cheaper. Neither of them admitted they secretly believed both things. One Friday evening, they stopped by the neighborhood bakery after Rebecca's shift. The woman behind the counter smiled before either of them spoke. 1 cinnamon roll? Benjamin nodded. You know us too well. The cashier smiled. You always argue over who gets the bigger half. Rebecca looked offended. We do not. Benjamin thanked the cashier, picked up the box, and waited until they reached the car. He opened it, carefully broke the pastry in half, then quietly traded his larger piece for Rebecca's while pretending not to notice. Rebecca watched him through the windshield instead of looking at the pastry. You know I saw that. I don't know what you're talking about. You always switch them. I absolutely don't. You've done it every single time. Benjamin shrugged. I must be very bad at hiding it. No. She smiled softly. You're very bad at letting me have the smaller piece. He looked out the windshield before answering. I like knowing you got the better half. Neither of them said anything after that. They simply ate together while the late afternoon traffic crawled past. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't a celebration. It was simply Friday. Years later, Rebecca would remember that cinnamon roll more clearly than some birthdays. Benjamin's logistics company was still small enough that everyone did a little of everything. Some mornings, he loaded trucks himself. Other mornings, he swept warehouse floors before employees arrived because hiring another maintenance worker wasn't in the budget. Rebecca visited whenever her hospital schedule allowed. She never arrived empty-handed. Coffee, homemade cookies, sometimes sandwiches. Eventually, nobody asked who she was. The warehouse simply felt different when Rebecca walked through the door. She knew names, not job titles, names. She remembered whose son had made the baseball team, whose wife had surgery, whose daughter was applying to college. One afternoon, she handed a coffee to Carl, one of the warehouse supervisors. How's Lily doing? Carl blinked. You remembered? Her piano recital was yesterday. A smile spread across his face before he answered. She played without looking at the sheet music. Rebecca clapped once. I knew she would. Carl laughed. Benjamin watched the conversation from across the loading dock. His operations manager stepped beside him. Your wife's got a better memory than all of us. Benjamin smiled with quiet pride. She remembers people. The manager nodded. That's a rare gift. Benjamin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched Rebecca laugh with 3 employees gathered around a stack of shipping pallets. Then he said, almost to himself, when this company finally finds its feet. He walked toward her. She looked up the moment she heard him. He reached for her hand without thinking. One squeeze, nothing dramatic, just familiar. We'll never let success change who gets credit for the dream. Rebecca looked at him for a second longer than usual, then smiled. I know. She believed him completely. That evening, after Rebecca fell asleep on the couch with a book resting across her lap, Benjamin carried a blanket from the bedroom and tucked it around her without waking her. On the kitchen table sat the budgeting notebook. Beside it rested a white envelope. Master's degree fund. He picked it up carefully, turned it over once, smiled, then opened his laptop to review the latest company financial report before bed. The smile faded. He read the numbers again. Then, once more, payroll, accounts payable, overdue invoices, cash flow. He closed the laptop slowly and looked toward the living room. Rebecca was still asleep. The envelope remained in his hands. For the first time since opening the company, Benjamin realized determination might not be enough to save it. Benjamin woke before the alarm. For a few seconds, he lay still, listening to the quiet rhythm of the apartment. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. Beside him, Rebecca slept with one hand tucked beneath her cheek, her hair spilling across the pillow she'd stolen from his side of the bed years ago. He smiled. She always denied it. "You have two pillows. They're not your pillows. They become mine the second you fall asleep." She'd insist she had no idea what he was talking about. Every morning, the evidence was right there. Benjamin carefully slid out of bed without waking her. As he reached the kitchen, his eyes landed on the white envelope resting beside the budgeting notebook. Master's degree fund. He touched the corner of the envelope for only a second. Then he picked up his briefcase instead. Inside was yesterday's financial report. He read the last page one more time. Cash reserves could sustain payroll for approximately 20 to 6 days. 26. Not a month. Not enough. Benjamin closed the briefcase before Rebecca walked into the kitchen. She was still half asleep. "You left without making coffee?" He looked guilty. "I was distracted." She pretended to gasp. "I need to write this date down." He laughed. "I'll make it." "No." She gently nudged him away from the coffee maker. "You already burned the last pot." "I maintain the machine was defective." "The machine survived. It had an attitude." Rebecca shook her head. "I married someone who argues with appliances." "You married someone who defends them." She poured 2 mugs without another word. The conversation felt exactly like every other morning. Benjamin wished it actually was. At the warehouse, everyone greeted him the same way they always had. "Morning, Ben." "Morning. How's Rebecca?" "Doing great." The answers came automatically. Only Benjamin knew how carefully he was protecting the version of his life everyone believed existed. He walked through the warehouse before anyone asked him a single business question. That had become another ritual. He checked every loading dock, every truck, every employee. Carl was already stacking pallets near the back wall. "Morning?" Benjamin nodded. "Morning." Carl wiped sweat from his forehead. "Lily's science fair is tonight." Benjamin smiled immediately. "She's still building that volcano?" Carl laughed. "No, now she's trying to convince everyone she's going to be an engineer." Benjamin grinned. "Tell her she's already halfway there." Carl smiled. "I will." As Benjamin walked away, he glanced around the warehouse. Forklifts moved. Tape guns clicked. Someone laughed in the break room. The coffee machine sputtered like it always did. It looked ordinary. That's what made it so difficult. None of these people knew how close ordinary had come to disappearing. The first client canceled before lunch. Not permanently, just postponed. 30 more days. Benjamin thanked them politely, hung up, then stared at the wall longer than necessary. 30 days meant another invoice that wouldn't arrive in time. He crossed one payment off his calendar, moved 3 others. His pencil broke. He stared at the broken tip in his hand. Then, quietly sharpened another one. No frustration, just exhaustion. That evening, Rebecca was already setting the table when Benjamin came home. "You remembered." He blinked. "What?" "It's Thursday." He looked at the notebook, already waiting on the table. Thursday. Budget night. Their oldest tradition. "I almost forgot." Rebecca smiled. "I noticed." He sat down slowly. For years, Thursday nights had followed the same pattern. Receipts, bills, laughter, plans. Tonight, Benjamin couldn't remember a single number after the first page. Rebecca watched him circle the electric bill twice. "You already added that." "I did?" She nodded gently. He looked down, then laughed quietly at himself. "I think my brain called in sick." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then we'll finish tomorrow." He looked at the notebook, then at her. "No, let's finish." They did, but it wasn't really budgeting anymore. Rebecca carried most of the conversation. Benjamin answered when she asked something directly. When they finished, Rebecca closed the notebook instead of him. That had never happened before. Neither of them mentioned it. On Saturday morning they went grocery shopping. Another ritual. Another ordinary piece of their life. Benjamin reached for the expensive coffee. Rebecca quietly put it back. He smiled. A few aisles later, he slipped it into the cart again. She noticed. Removed it. At checkout, she caught him smiling. You did it again. I don't know what you're talking about. She held up the coffee. This. You deserve better coffee. We deserve electricity. He laughed. She laughed with him, then placed the cheaper coffee on the conveyor belt. Benjamin didn't argue. He simply reached for her hand as they walked through the parking lot. Neither of them realized moments like these would someday become memories they wished they could relive. Monday brought another bank meeting. The loan officer recognized Benjamin before he sat down. I'm sorry. Benjamin understood the answer before hearing the question. They spoke for less than 10 minutes. The numbers hadn't changed. Neither had the decision. When Benjamin reached his truck, he closed the door but didn't start the engine. His phone buzzed. Rebecca. He answered immediately. Hi. Did I catch you at a bad time? No. I just wanted to know if you'll be home for dinner. Benjamin looked through the windshield at the bank behind him. I'll try. Rebecca smiled through the phone. You always say that. I know. I made pot roast. His favorite. I'll be there. After they hung up, Benjamin sat in silence. The truck remained parked. The engine stayed off. Outside, people came and went from the bank without noticing the man sitting alone in the pickup. For the first time in years, Benjamin admitted something he hadn't allowed himself to think. Hard work wasn't fixing this anymore. That night, he arrived almost an hour late. The pot roast was still warm. Rebecca had reheated it twice. She never mentioned that. Instead, she served him the larger piece. He noticed. You always do that. She looked confused. Do what? Give me the bigger portion. She smiled. You always notice. I always noticed. The sentence escaped before he could stop it. Rebecca looked at him. Something about those words felt different. Not wrong, just heavier. After dinner, they washed dishes together. Benjamin rinsed. Rebecca dried. Neither spoke for a while. Then she asked quietly, You haven't laughed much lately. He looked up. What? You used to laugh before I finished telling the joke. He smiled because she expected him to. I'm just tired. Rebecca nodded. I know. She handed him another plate. He almost told her. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Instead, he reached over, kissed her forehead, and whispered, Nothing I can't handle. She smiled, but after he walked into the living room, Rebecca remained standing at the sink, the dish towel still folded neatly in her hands. For the first time in 11 years, she wasn't worried about the business. She was worried about her husband. Rebecca woke before sunrise. For several minutes she lay awake, watching the faint lights spread across the ceiling. Benjamin was already gone. His side of the bed had grown cool. She reached toward the empty pillow without thinking, then pulled her hand back. The apartment felt unusually quiet. No humming from the coffee maker, no music drifting from the kitchen. Just the soft ticking of the wall clock. She wrapped a sweater around her shoulders and walked into the living room. The budgeting notebook still rested on the kitchen table. Beside it sat the white envelope, Master's Degree Fund. Rebecca picked it up carefully. She didn't open it. She already knew what was inside. Years of night shifts, skipped vacations, birthday money, holiday bonuses, one decision after another, folded into a single envelope. She ran her thumb over her own handwriting, then quietly returned it to the table, not because she'd made a decision, because she hadn't. At the hospital, the day refused to slow down. Call lights, medication rounds, families asking questions. A frightened little boy clung to his mother's hand outside an examination room. Rebecca knelt until they were eye level. It's okay to be nervous. He nodded without speaking. She smiled. So am I sometimes. The boy looked surprised. You are? Every time something matters. By the time she stood, his grip on his mother's hand had loosened. One of the senior nurses watched the exchange from the hallway. You've got a gift. Rebecca laughed softly. I've just had good teachers. No. The nurse smiled. You'd make an outstanding administrator someday. Rebecca's smile lingered. then faded almost as quickly. She thanked her and continued down the corridor. Those words stayed with her long after the shift ended. That afternoon, she stopped by the university campus on her way home. She hadn't planned to. Her car simply turned into the parking lot almost by itself. Students crossed the courtyard carrying backpacks and coffee cups. Some hurried toward afternoon lectures. Others sat beneath the oak trees reading. Rebecca remained inside the car. She imagined herself among them, not wishing, remembering. A year ago, she'd walked these same sidewalks after receiving her acceptance letter. She had pictured late-night classes, research projects, graduation. She smiled, then quietly backed out of the parking space. Not because she had stopped wanting that life, because another life was asking something different of her. Benjamin's afternoon was unraveling. A delivery truck broke down halfway to Raleigh. A longtime client called to delay another payment. One supplier refused to extend credit any longer. By 4 o'clock, Benjamin had solved 3 problems. None of the important ones. Carl knocked gently on his office door. "You heading home?" Benjamin looked at the stack of invoices spread across his desk. "In a little while." Carl nodded. "My wife made too much lasagna." Benjamin smiled. "Sounds dangerous." "She'll send some home with you." Benjamin thanked him. Carl hesitated. "You know." Benjamin looked up. "You don't have to carry every problem by yourself." Benjamin's smile didn't disappear. It simply became quieter. "I know." Carl studied him for a second, then left. The office felt even emptier after the door closed. Rebecca reached home first. She changed into comfortable clothes, watered the plants, folded the laundry, set 2 plates on the table. Ordinary things. The kind of things that usually made a house feel peaceful. Today they only made it feel larger. She opened the kitchen drawer, removed the white envelope, held it in both hands, then walked into the bedroom. She placed the envelope beside her graduate school acceptance letter. For a long time, she simply looked at them together. One represented the future she had imagined. The other represented the future they had built. Neither was wrong. Neither came without sacrifice. She sat quietly until she heard Benjamin's truck pull into the driveway. He entered carrying the same tired smile she'd been seeing for weeks. "Something smells good. I made chicken pot pie. My favorite." "I know." He kissed her forehead. She held him a little longer than usual. Benjamin noticed. "You okay?" Rebecca nodded. "I've been thinking." His stomach tightened. "About what?" She took his hand. "Sit with me." No panic, no accusation, no raised voices. Just 2 people sitting at the same kitchen table where they'd planned almost every part of their life together. Rebecca placed the folded loan rejection letter between them. Benjamin stared at it. The color slowly drained from his face. "I can explain." "I know you can. I was trying to fix it." "I know. I didn't want you worrying." "I know." Every answer she gave sounded gentle, which somehow made them harder to hear. Benjamin lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Rebecca reached across the table and covered his hand. "Don't apologize for loving me." He looked up. She continued quietly. "But don't decide alone what I'm strong enough to carry." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Benjamin swallowed. "I promised your future would never become the price of this company." Rebecca smiled sadly. "You also promised we'd carry our future together." Neither promise had been made lightly. Neither could survive without the other. Benjamin leaned back in his chair. "I've already been to 3 banks." Rebecca listened. "I sold equipment." She nodded. "I cut every expense I could find." She nodded again. "I don't know what else to do." Those 7 words hurt more than any speech, because Benjamin almost never admitted he didn't know. Rebecca stood, walked quietly to the bedroom. Benjamin remained at the table. When she returned, she carried the white envelope. She placed it beside the rejection letter. Benjamin immediately shook his head. "No." She didn't push it closer. She simply left it where it was. "We've been saving this for years." "I know. It belongs to you. It belongs to our future." "Rebecca." She smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. "My degree isn't disappearing. She rested one hand over the envelope. "It's waiting." Benjamin couldn't answer. She continued, "The people in that warehouse." She thought of Carl, his daughter, the young driver expecting his first baby, the receptionist who always remembered everyone's birthdays. They're waiting too. Benjamin looked at the envelope as though it weighed 100 pounds. "I can't ask you to do this." Rebecca shook her head. "You didn't." Another silence. Longer this time. Benjamin finally whispered, "What if I can't pay you back?" Rebecca laughed softly through the tears. "I didn't marry an investment." She reached for his hand. "I married you." Benjamin lowered his head. For the first time since starting the company, he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for one tear to fall onto the old budgeting notebook between them. Rebecca quietly turned another page of the notebook, found a blank line, picked up the pen. Instead of writing another expense, she wrote one sentence. "Still, our dream." Benjamin looked at those 3 words for a long time, then covered them with his hand. "I'll never forget this." Rebecca believed him, completely. Neither of them could imagine that years later, the promise Benjamin would struggle hardest to keep would not be repaying the money. It would be remembering who had believed in him before the world did. The first time Benjamin paid every employee on Friday without wondering whether the account would clear, he didn't celebrate. He sat alone in his office after everyone had left and stared at the payroll confirmation until the screen went dark. For nearly a year, Fridays had been something he survived. Now they felt ordinary. Ordinary had never looked so beautiful. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Carl leaned against the doorway. "You still here?" Benjamin looked up. "I wanted to make sure payroll went through." Carl laughed. "It did." "I know. So why are you still checking?" Benjamin closed the laptop. "I think my brain forgot we're allowed to breathe now." Carl nodded. "It'll remember." Before leaving, he stopped at the door. Lily got accepted into the robotics camp. Benjamin's face brightened. "That's incredible." Carl smiled. "Wouldn't have happened if this place hadn't stayed open." Benjamin looked through the office window at the warehouse floor where the lights were beginning to switch off one by one. "For a while, I thought I was going to lose all of this." Carl followed his gaze. "You didn't." Benjamin nodded. "No." Carl rested one hand on the doorframe. "Just make sure this place doesn't start rebuilding you." Benjamin laughed softly. "I think I'm too stubborn for that." Carl smiled. "I hope so." Benjamin laughed again. Carl didn't. That evening, Benjamin arrived home before sunset. Rebecca opened the front door before he reached it. "You scared me. I used my key. You usually text first. I wanted to surprise you." She stepped aside with a grin. "It worked." He held up a small white bakery box. Rebecca laughed. "No way." "I remembered." "You remembered because today is Friday." "No." He smiled. "I remembered because we finally earned it." She opened the box. Inside were 2 cinnamon rolls. She looked at them quietly. "You bought 2. We can afford 2 now." His voice carried relief more than pride. Rebecca smiled, then gently slid one pastry back toward him. "I liked sharing one." Benjamin chuckled. "I figured you'd want your own now." She looked at him warmly. "I never wanted my own." Benjamin blinked, then smiled. "You know what?" He opened the box again, broke one cinnamon roll in half. Without thinking, he exchanged his larger half for hers. Rebecca laughed. "There you are." "What?" "My husband." They both laughed. The untouched second cinnamon roll remained inside its box. Neither of them reached for it. Neither realized that success had quietly tried to replace a tradition that had never needed improving. Business kept growing, not dramatically, just steadily. One new client became 3. 3 became 6. The warehouse hired more people. The company leased a larger office. Benjamin attended meetings where polished conference tables replaced loading docks. He still carried the old warehouse key on his key ring. Every morning, he walked through the warehouse before climbing the office stairs. Carl caught him doing it again. You've got supervisors now. Benjamin smiled. I know. So why are you still making the rounds? Benjamin looked across the warehouse. This place built me before I ever built it. Carl nodded. Then don't forget who helped build you. Benjamin looked confused for a second. Carl simply smiled and walked away. A week later, their largest prospective client toured the new office. The presentation went smoothly. Questions were answered. Numbers made sense. Hands were shaken. Then the representative closed his folder. There's just one condition. Benjamin waited. Our company operates around the clock. Benjamin nodded. If something goes wrong. The representative continued. We need one decision maker available 24 hours a day. Benjamin didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the family photograph sitting on the corner of his desk. Rebecca was laughing in the picture. The photo had been taken outside the old warehouse years earlier. Only a heartbeat passed. Then Benjamin looked back. You'll have me. The representative smiled. Excellent. The deal was done. Benjamin never noticed himself turning the framed photograph face down so the paperwork would fit across the desk. He turned it upright again before leaving. But the audience remembers. Rebecca had brought lunch that afternoon. She arrived just as the meeting ended. Benjamin saw her through the conference room glass. He smiled. She lifted the paper bag. He held up one finger. 1 minute. She nodded. She didn't mind waiting. 1 minute became 20. Rebecca sat quietly in reception, reading a nursing journal while assistants hurried past. Eventually, Benjamin hurried over. I'm sorry. She smiled. I know. The client walked over. You must be Rebecca. She offered her hand. It's nice to meet you. The client smiled. Benjamin speaks highly of you. Rebecca glanced toward Benjamin. I'm glad. She handed him the lunch. You'll forget if I take it home. Benjamin laughed. Probably. She kissed his cheek. I'll see you tonight. As she walked toward the parking lot, she turned once. Benjamin was already answering another question. He didn't see her looking. Thursday arrived. Budget night. The oldest tradition in their marriage. Rebecca already had the notebook open. Bills were stacked neatly beside 2 mugs of coffee. Benjamin loosened his tie as he walked in. Perfect timing. I'll wash my hands. His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. The new client. He closed his eyes for a second. Rebecca noticed. You don't have to answer. Benjamin looked at the notebook, then at her, then back at the phone. Only a few seconds passed. I'll make it quick. Rebecca smiled. I know you will. He answered. She uncapped her pen, updated the electric bill, crossed off the mortgage, adjusted the grocery budget. The coffee slowly cooled. Benjamin was still talking. She waited, then quietly closed the notebook, slid it into the drawer, turned off the kitchen light. When Benjamin finally ended the call 40 minutes later, the apartment had become still. He walked into the bedroom. Rebecca was reading. I'm sorry. She marked her page. Did everything work out? It did. She smiled. Good. Benjamin waited. She returned to her book. For reasons he couldn't explain, the room suddenly felt unfamiliar. The next morning, Rebecca entered the kitchen before leaving for the hospital. She automatically placed 2 coffee mugs beside the machine, then stopped. Benjamin had already left before sunrise. She smiled to herself, picked up the second mug, placed it back inside the cabinet. Nothing about the moment felt sad. It simply felt different. Saturday morning, Benjamin finally repaired the cabinet that had refused to close for years. Rebecca opened it, closed it, then laughed. It almost doesn't feel like our kitchen anymore. Benjamin grinned. I'll loosen the hinges if you miss it. She laughed and kissed him. I'm glad you're home. So am I. His phone vibrated. Neither moved. It vibrated again. Benjamin looked at the screen, then back at Rebecca. For a moment, it seemed he might ignore it. The phone rang again. He sighed. I'm sorry. Rebecca nodded. I know, he answered as he walked toward the living room. Rebecca remained in the kitchen. She rested her hand on the newly repaired cabinet, then quietly finished setting the table. 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 glasses. She waited. 5 minutes passed. The food was getting cold. Without thinking, she sat down. For the first time since the early days of their marriage, Rebecca began eating before Benjamin joined her. In the next room, Benjamin's voice drifted through the house. "Yes, I'll take care of it." He never noticed the moment. Rebecca barely noticed it herself. But somewhere between the second cinnamon roll, the closed budgeting notebook, and the first dinner she ate alone, success had begun asking for something neither of them had ever intended to give. Winter settled gently over Charlotte. The mornings arrived wrapped in gray skies and cool air that sent people hurrying from parking lots into warm buildings with collars pulled high around their necks. Rebecca had always liked arriving at the hospital before sunrise. Those quiet minutes before the hallways filled belonged entirely to her. She would pour herself a cup of coffee, greet the overnight nurses, and stand for a moment beside the large window overlooking the employee parking lot as the city slowly woke beneath the fading streetlights. Life inside the hospital moved differently from the outside world. People came frightened. Families came exhausted. Children came confused. No matter how busy the day became, Rebecca had learned that people often remembered kindness longer than medicine. That had become her quiet gift. Late one afternoon, she finished helping an elderly couple prepare to leave the hospital. The husband carefully folded every instruction sheet into neat squares before slipping them into his coat pocket. His wife smiled apologetically. "He thinks folding them makes them easier to remember." Rebecca laughed. "My grandfather believed the same thing." The older woman reached for Rebecca's hand. "You've made this whole week easier." Rebecca squeezed her fingers gently. "You've already done the hard part." As the couple slowly walked toward the elevator, the husband instinctively reached for his wife's hand before the doors opened. Rebecca watched them disappear. Without realizing it, her thumb brushed against her own wedding ring. "You're staring." Rebecca turned. A younger nurse named Elena smiled as she organized medication charts. "They're sweet together." Rebecca smiled back. "They are." Elena hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you ever move into hospital administration?" Rebecca looked down at the clipboard she was holding. "I got busy." Elena tilted her head. "Doing what?" Rebecca opened her mouth, then quietly smiled instead. She never answered. Elena eventually returned to her charts, but Rebecca carried the question with her for the rest of the afternoon. On the drive home, she stopped at the neighborhood grocery store. It had become part of her Thursday routine. She moved through the aisles almost without thinking. Benjamin's favorite soup, fresh vegetables, the coffee he liked. At the bakery she paused. Rows of warm cinnamon rolls filled the display. She almost reached for one, then smiled softly. "They're better shared." She picked up fresh bread instead. Benjamin's message arrived before she reached the checkout. "Running late. Don't wait for dinner. Love you." Rebecca read it once, then again, not because it surprised her, because it no longer did. She slipped the phone into her purse. The cashier smiled. "Busy husband?" Rebecca smiled politely. "Very." Back home, the house felt unusually still. She unpacked the groceries, placed the bread in the pantry, opened the repaired kitchen cabinet without thinking. It still closed perfectly. Benjamin had finally fixed it. Funny how something so small could still make her smile. She opened the kitchen drawer. Inside rested their old budgeting notebook. The corners were softer now. The pages carried years of careful handwriting. Mortgage, utilities, vacation savings, birthday reminders, small jokes scribbled in the margins. Then she found the familiar words. "Still our dream." Her fingers rested lightly across the faded ink. She smiled, not because she missed the dream, because she still believed it hadn't disappeared, only paused. Saturday morning arrived with sunshine spilling through the bedroom curtains. Benjamin left early for an investor breakfast downtown. Before leaving, he kissed Rebecca's forehead. "I shouldn't be long." "I know." After he left, Rebecca decided to clean the spare bedroom closet. A slim blue folder slid from the top shelf. She smiled before she even picked it up. Her graduate school folder. Inside were acceptance letters, updated tuition estimates, course catalogs, scholarship notes. Every January, she quietly replaced outdated information with new brochures. Not because anyone asked her to, because she refused to let the dream grow old, simply because she had. Near the back rested a yellow sticky note, Benjamin's handwriting. "Next year, I promise." She smiled. Promises weren't always broken. Sometimes they simply waited longer than anyone expected. She slipped the note back into place. That evening, she opened her laptop. A university nearby was hosting an online information session for nurses returning to graduate school. Rebecca listened carefully as professors discussed leadership programs, flexible schedules, and evening classes. Questions filled the chat window. "Am I too old to start over?" The presenter smiled warmly. "We've welcomed students in their 60s. Another question appeared. "What if life interrupted my plans?" The presenter nodded. "Life doesn't erase your purpose. It only changes the road you take to reach it." Rebecca wrote the sentence in her notebook. Then she clicked another tab. The admissions page opened. A blue button appeared. "Start your application." Her fingers rested on the keyboard. She typed, "Rebecca." She typed her last name. Then the sound of Benjamin's truck pulling into the driveway drifted through the window. Rebecca looked toward the front door. She smiled. "I'll finish it tomorrow." She closed the laptop. Tomorrow felt close enough. Benjamin walked inside carrying a bouquet of inexpensive grocery store flowers. "I saw these and thought of you." Rebecca laughed. "They're beautiful." He kissed her forehead. "What were you doing?" "Oh." She glanced toward the closed laptop. "Just watching something. I want to hear about it. I'll tell you while we eat." His phone vibrated. Benjamin looked at the screen. His smile faded slightly. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "I know." He answered the call. Rebecca quietly placed the flowers into a glass vase. She trimmed each stem carefully, changed the water, set them in the middle of the table. 23 minutes later, Benjamin returned. "I'm sorry." She smiled. "You were saying something happened today." Rebecca looked at him, then at the flowers. She smiled again. "It wasn't important." Benjamin believed her. The audience knows it was. The following week, Rebecca began mentoring Elena. The younger nurse struggled with balancing efficiency and compassion. "I'm always worried I'm spending too much time with patients." Rebecca handed her another chart. "They'll forget how quickly you finished paperwork." She smiled gently. "They won't forget whether you made them feel seen." Weeks later, families began asking for Elena by name. Whenever they thanked her, she quietly thought of Rebecca. Rebecca never heard any of it. She wasn't the kind of person who needed to. 3 evenings later, Benjamin came home long after dark. He found Rebecca asleep on the couch. A blanket covered her legs. A library book rested upside down across her chest. He smiled, carefully removed the book, placed a bookmark inside, pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. She stirred. "You made it home." "I'm sorry I'm late." Her eyes remained closed. "I know." He kissed her forehead, then gently lifted her into his arms and carried her to bed the way he had done years earlier when they first married. After tucking her in, Benjamin returned to the living room. The blue graduate school folder rested on the coffee table beside the closed laptop. He picked it up. His thumb brushed across the cover. For a moment, he looked as though he might open it. His phone vibrated. He sighed. "Benjamin speaking." Still talking, he set his laptop down absent-mindedly. It landed directly on top of the blue folder. He walked toward his home office without another glance. The folder disappeared beneath the weight of work. Not because Benjamin chose to bury Rebecca's dream, because he never noticed he was doing it. Spring settled over Charlotte almost without anyone noticing. The mornings grew warmer. The warehouse parking lot filled before sunrise. New delivery trucks arrived every week. Employees who had once shared folding tables during lunch now joked about needing a bigger break room. The company was no longer fighting to survive. It was learning how to grow. Benjamin often stood outside his office before the workday began. Forklifts rolled across the loading dock. Drivers greeted one another by name. Someone laughed loud enough for the sound to echo through the warehouse. Years earlier, those sounds had meant uncertainty. Now they meant responsibility. Every truck represented another promise. Every employee represented another family depending on him. Success no longer felt exciting. It felt heavy. Carl walked into Benjamin's office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You beat me here again." Benjamin smiled. "I couldn't sleep." Carl handed him a mug. "You've said that every Monday this month." Benjamin laughed. "It'll settle down." Carl glanced toward the warehouse floor. "You still walk through every morning?" "I do," Carl nodded. "But you don't stop anymore." Benjamin looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You used to stop every few minutes." Carl smiled. "You asked about people's kids. You helped unload trucks. You knew who was having a rough week." Benjamin looked through the office window. "I guess everyone's busy now." Carl took a sip of coffee. "Maybe." Then he added quietly, "Or maybe you're the busiest one." The room fell silent. Benjamin looked down at the old warehouse key hanging beside his office keys. Without thinking, he wrapped his fingers around it. Friday evening brought the annual Charlotte Small Business Association dinner. Rebecca wore the navy blue dress Benjamin had surprised her with 2 anniversaries earlier. As she adjusted an earring in the hallway mirror, Benjamin stopped behind her. "You still look at me like that?" She smiled at his reflection. "Like what?" "Like I'm still the guy who borrowed your umbrella outside the hospital." Rebecca laughed. "You are." He slipped his arm around her waist. "For the record, I still think pretending to forget your umbrella was a terrible pickup line." It worked. It did. For a moment, they laughed the way they always had. Then Benjamin's phone vibrated. He glanced at it, turned the screen face down. "Later," Rebecca smiled. "Thank you." That tiny choice mattered more than either of them realized. The banquet hall buzzed with conversation. Local business owners congratulated Benjamin on the company's growth. Several people introduced themselves to Rebecca. "You must be proud." She smiled warmly. "I am." When Benjamin's name was announced, applause filled the room. He walked to the stage. His acceptance speech lasted barely 3 minutes. He thanked his employees. He thanked Carl. He thanked mentors who had believed in the company. He thanked customers who had trusted a small warehouse years earlier. The applause grew louder. Rebecca applauded too. Benjamin returned to the table. "How bad was it?" Rebecca laughed. "You were nervous." "I always am." "You couldn't tell." Benjamin picked up his water glass. "I forgot to thank the operations team." Rebecca looked at him. "You'll remember next time." "I will." Across the room, Carl quietly watched Rebecca. She was smiling, proud, completely sincere. Carl lowered his eyes. Something about that smile worried him. Life found a rhythm. Breakfast conversations became shorter. Weekend mornings became opportunities to catch up on work. Vacation ideas stayed written on sticky notes attached to the refrigerator. One Saturday, Rebecca carried coffee onto the back porch. Benjamin sat with his laptop already open. "I've got an idea." He smiled. "I like those. We haven't been to the lake in almost a year." Benjamin looked up. "We should." "When?" He hesitated, only for a second. "After this quarter." Rebecca smiled. "Okay." She started to say something else. "Ben." He looked up. "Yeah?" She studied his tired face, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the untouched breakfast growing cold beside the laptop. Then she smiled softly. "Nothing." "You sure?" She nodded. "It can wait." Benjamin reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thanks." She smiled, but after he returned to his emails, her eyes drifted toward the refrigerator door. A colorful brochure from the lakeside park peeked out beneath a grocery list. She gently straightened the magnet holding both papers in place, then quietly covered the brochure completely with this week's shopping list. The hospital remained Rebecca's place of steady purpose. Elena had become one of the strongest nurses on the floor. One afternoon she hurried toward Rebecca with tears in her eyes. "I got promoted." Rebecca's entire face brightened. "I knew you would." Elena hugged her tightly. "I learned everything from you." Rebecca laughed. "No, you learned because you cared." Later that afternoon, Rebecca watched Elena comfort a frightened patient exactly the way she had taught her months earlier. Rebecca smiled to herself. Some victories never appeared in newspapers. They still mattered. Late that evening, Benjamin sat alone in his office. A baseball glove rested on the shelf behind his desk. Months earlier, he had promised Carl a Saturday company softball game. He picked up the glove, turned it over in his hands, smiled. His calendar notification appeared. Investor strategy meeting, Saturday, 9:00. Benjamin quietly placed the glove back on the shelf. No frustration, no complaint, just another promise postponed. That night, Benjamin arrived home after Rebecca had finished dinner. His plate waited inside the oven. Beside it rested a folded note. Heat for 2 minutes. Don't overcook it again. He smiled. Some things never changed. As he sat alone eating, the house felt unusually quiet. He glanced toward the staircase. Rebecca had already gone upstairs. He carried his empty plate into the kitchen, paused beside the budgeting drawer. His fingers rested on the handle. Then he closed his eyes. "I'll do better next week." He believed it. He quietly climbed the stairs. Rebecca lay on her side beneath the blanket. He slipped into bed carefully, trying not to wake her. After several moments, his breathing settled into sleep. The room became still. Rebecca slowly opened her eyes. She had been awake the entire time. She turned toward Benjamin. The lines of exhaustion on his face looked deeper than they had a year ago. Very gently, she reached over and pulled the blanket higher across his shoulder. She brushed one strand of hair away from his forehead, then whispered so softly that only the quiet room could hear, "I know you're trying." She switched off the bedside lamp. Darkness settled across the room. On the refrigerator downstairs, the grocery list still covered the brochure for the lake they never visited. In the office across town, a baseball glove rested untouched on a shelf, and inside the kitchen drawer, the old budgeting notebook remained exactly where Rebecca had left it. No single missed evening had changed their marriage. No single phone call had done it. It was the accumulation of ordinary tomorrows, each postponed with the best of intentions, that was quietly teaching two people who still loved each other how to live separate daily lives under the same roof. The anniversary landed on a Thursday. Rebecca noticed that before she noticed the date itself. She smiled as she stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the coffee maker while the morning light stretched across the familiar table. Years earlier, Thursdays had belonged to them, not because life was easier, because it wasn't. Those evenings had been filled with unpaid bills, second-hand furniture, and conversations that often lasted long after midnight. They would spread receipts across the table, open the budgeting notebook, and celebrate every small victory as though it were a holiday. When money was especially tight, they bought one cinnamon roll from the bakery around the corner and split it in half. Benjamin always insisted she take the bigger piece. She never did. The budgeting notebook still rested inside the same kitchen drawer. Rebecca reached toward it before stopping herself. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about balancing numbers. Tonight was about remembering why they had started everything in the first place. She reached for 2 coffee mugs instead. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Benjamin appeared a moment later, already dressed for work, his tie hanging loosely around his neck while he checked something on his phone. He looked tired, more tired than she could remember seeing him in years. She waited until he looked up. "Happy anniversary." His expression softened immediately. He slipped the phone into his pocket. "Happy anniversary." He crossed the kitchen and kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry I've been disappearing lately." Rebecca looked at him for a moment before answering. "I know. I mean it. I know." He searched her face. "You always say I know." She smiled. "Because I do." He laughed. "You're making forgiveness sound suspiciously easy." "I'm making coffee. Forgiveness comes after caffeine." That made him laugh harder. For a few quiet minutes, they stood together drinking coffee while sunlight slowly filled the kitchen. Benjamin reached across the counter and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear without thinking. The gesture was so familiar, it almost belonged to another season of their lives. Rebecca didn't say anything. She simply smiled. For the first time in weeks, she let herself believe tonight might feel like the beginning instead of another postponement. After finishing her hospital shift, Rebecca drove toward home before changing her mind at the next intersection. She turned instead toward the old shopping district, where small family-owned stores had somehow survived decades of new developments. Benjamin had never cared much about expensive gifts. He preferred things that meant something. She wandered through a narrow antique shop filled with clocks that no longer worked, faded photographs, weathered toolboxes, and shelves crowded with forgotten pieces of other people's lives. An elderly man looked up from polishing a glass display. "Looking for anything in particular?" Rebecca smiled. "I'll know it when I find it." She moved slowly through the shop. Then she stopped. A brass keychain hung from a wooden display near the register. It was shaped like an old warehouse key. She picked it up. The weight surprised her. On the front, neatly engraved, were 4 simple words: "Never forget where you started." She smiled before she realized she was smiling. Benjamin still carried the original warehouse key every day. It no longer unlocked a single door. He refused to remove it from his keyring anyway. The shop owner noticed the expression on her face. "That one has a story, doesn't it?" "It does. We can engrave the back, if you'd like." Rebecca turned the keychain over. The metal was blank. For a moment she wasn't standing inside the antique shop anymore. She was back at the kitchen table years earlier. The graduate school savings envelope lay open between them. Benjamin had apologized for the 10th time. "I'm asking you to wait again." Rebecca had smiled, emptied the envelope into the business account, and opened the budgeting notebook. Before closing it, she had written 4 words almost without thinking. "Still our dream." She looked back at the shop owner. "Can you engrave that?" He smiled. "It'll take about 20 minutes." "I'll wait." When he handed it back to her, Rebecca traced the letters gently with her thumb before placing it inside a small gift box. It wasn't expensive. It didn't need to be. Some gifts measured love better than money ever could. On her way home, she passed a little bakery that had somehow resisted every chain store moving into the neighborhood. Without thinking, she pulled into the parking lot. The young cashier greeted her with a smile. "What can I get for you?" Rebecca looked toward the display. "1 cinnamon roll." The cashier laughed. "Just one?" Rebecca laughed too. "One's always been enough." She carried the warm paper bag back to her car. The smell filled the cabin before she even started the engine. She broke off a small piece. It tasted exactly the way she remembered. She looked at the rest for a moment before folding the bag closed again. Benjamin would smile when he saw it. He always did. She placed the bag beside the wrapped gift. Driving away, she caught herself planning the evening. Dinner, the celebration. Maybe afterward they could finally take that weekend at the lake they had postponed so many times. The brochure was probably still somewhere in the kitchen. She laughed softly at the thought. Maybe this year they would actually go. Across town, Benjamin sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by printed copies of his anniversary speech. Coffee had gone cold beside his laptop. Several pages lay covered in handwritten edits. He read each paragraph aloud under his breath, crossing out words, replacing names, adding details, removing jokes. He wanted every person who had carried the company through difficult years to feel appreciated. The warehouse crew, Carl, his mentors, the banker who had approved the expansion loan when every other bank had said no, his first clients, the operations team, department heads. He reached the final page. Read it one last time, then nodded to himself. "I think that's everyone." He gathered the pages into a neat stack. A knock interrupted the quiet. Carl leaned against the open doorway. "Practicing?" Benjamin smiled. "Trying not to embarrass myself." Carl stepped inside. "Mind if I hear the ending?" Benjamin shook his head. "You'll hear it tonight with everyone else." Carl looked at the papers scattered across the table. "You've been working on that all week." "I don't want to leave anybody out." Carl chuckled. "Looks like you've thanked half the city." Benjamin smiled. "It feels like half the city helped build this place." Carl's eyes drifted toward the framed photograph on the bookshelf. Benjamin and Rebecca stood outside the first warehouse wearing jeans streaked with white paint. Neither of them had noticed the camera. They were laughing about something neither could remember anymore. "You heading home soon?" Carl asked. Benjamin checked the clock. Another hour. Carl nodded slowly. You know what today is. Benjamin laughed. Our anniversary. Carl shook his head. No. Benjamin looked confused. Carl met his eyes. It's your anniversary. The room grew quiet. Benjamin frowned for a second before smiling again. I know. Carl didn't argue. He simply nodded. I figured you did. He turned toward the door, then stopped. Ben? Yeah? Don't spend the whole evening thanking people who already know what they mean to you. Benjamin tilted his head. What does that mean? Carl smiled gently. I think you'll understand someday. He left before Benjamin could ask another question. Benjamin looked down at the speech again. His fingers rested on the corner of the first page. For reasons he couldn't explain, Carl's words lingered longer than they should have. His phone buzzed. A client calling from Chicago. Benjamin answered automatically. By the time the conversation ended, the feeling had passed. He slipped the speech into his leather folder, picked up his keys, and headed for the parking lot. The old warehouse key hanging from his key ring struck softly against the company's polished access card as he walked. Across the city, Rebecca placed the wrapped gift and the paper bag holding a single cinnamon roll onto the passenger seat of her car. Neither of them knew that they were driving toward the same celebration, carrying two different hopes for the same marriage. By the time Rebecca arrived at the hotel, the ballroom was already filling. Soft music drifted through the room while waiters moved between round tables dressed in white linen. Along one wall stood photographs tracing the company's history, from a rented warehouse with cracked concrete floors to the headquarters everyone admired today. Benjamin noticed her the moment she walked in. For the first time all week, his shoulders relaxed. She smiled, not the effortless smile he remembered from years ago. A smaller one, gentle, hopeful. He crossed the room. You made it. I said I would. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. I'm sorry about this week. I know. I'll make tonight worth it. She held his eyes for a second longer than usual. I'd like that. Before either of them could say more, someone called Benjamin's name from across the room. He glanced toward the voice, then back at Rebecca. I'll be right back. She nodded. I know. He disappeared into another conversation. Rebecca watched him go. Then she quietly took her seat. The evening unfolded the way company celebrations always did. Old stories, laughter, employees remembering impossible deadlines that somehow became victories. Carl stood and shared a story about the winter the heating failed inside the warehouse. The room erupted with laughter when he described Benjamin wearing 3 jackets while insisting productivity would somehow increase. Even Benjamin laughed. Rebecca laughed too. For a while, she stopped thinking about the distance between them. She watched him move from table to table. He looked lighter than he had in months. Every few minutes, their eyes met across the room. Each time he smiled. Each time she smiled back. The wrapped gift remained beneath her chair. She imagined giving it to him after the speeches were over. Some gifts deserved a quiet moment. This felt like one of them. Dessert plates arrived. The lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, 11 years ago this company began with a rented warehouse, 1 truck, and more determination than money. The audience applauded. And tonight, we'd like to hear from the man who helped turn that dream into reality. Benjamin stood. The applause grew louder. Rebecca felt something warm settle inside her. This wasn't simply a business anniversary. It was theirs. She folded her hands together beneath the table. Benjamin unfolded several handwritten pages. He looked out across the room. For a brief second, his eyes found Rebecca. She smiled. He smiled back. Then he began. I've spent the last week trying to figure out how to thank everyone who helped build this company. The audience listened. When people tell this story, they usually talk about the numbers. A few people chuckled. But businesses aren't built by numbers. They're built by people. He spoke about the warehouse crew who worked through winter storms, the dispatcher who slept in the office during the company's first expansion, the accountant who accepted delayed paychecks when cash flow disappeared. He thanked mentors, bankers, clients who stayed when larger competitors offered lower prices. He thanked Carl. Carl believed in me before I had a reason to believe in myself. Carl lowered his head with an embarrassed smile as the room applauded. Benjamin continued. He thanked department managers, drivers, receptionists, employees who had retired years earlier. As he turned another page, Rebecca felt herself relax. There was still time. The speech wasn't over. Benjamin glanced down at the final sheet. Only a few lines remained. He looked up. His eyes swept across the ballroom. For the briefest moment, they settled on Rebecca. Something flickered across his face. Almost recognition. Almost remembrance. Then someone near the front smiled and raised a glass. Benjamin smiled back. I think that's everyone. The words came naturally. So, tonight. Thank you to every person who helped make this company what it is. The ballroom erupted into applause. Rebecca clapped too. She kept smiling. 1 second, 2, 3. The applause continued. Benjamin stepped away from the podium. People rose to their feet. Rebecca slowly lowered her hands. The applause carried on without her. No one noticed. Not yet. She looked at the empty dessert plate in front of her, then at the wrapped anniversary gift resting beneath her chair. Her fingers moved to her wedding ring. She turned it once, twice, the familiar movement she'd made countless times over 11 years. This time, she slipped it off. She placed it carefully beside the untouched dessert fork. Not hidden, not displayed, simply left behind. A quiet decision. She picked up her purse, left the gift where it was, and walked toward the ballroom doors. Benjamin was thanking another employee when he looked back toward their table. Rebecca's chair was empty. At first, he assumed she had stepped away. Then, he saw the gift, still unopened, still beneath the chair. His eyes lifted to the table. The wedding ring caught the light. Everything around him seemed to lose its sound. He stared at it. Someone nearby continued speaking. Another person laughed. Glasses clinked. The room carried on exactly as before. Benjamin couldn't hear any of it. He reached the table. His hand hovered above the ring but never touched it. "Where's Rebecca?" he asked. No one answered. Carl had already seen. He walked over slowly. Neither man spoke for a moment. Finally, Carl looked toward the ballroom entrance. "You should go." Benjamin nodded once. He picked up neither the ring nor the gift. He simply turned and hurried into the hallway. The applause from the ballroom faded behind him. Ahead, at the far end of the corridor, Rebecca walked toward the hotel exit without looking back. Benjamin took a breath, then followed. Benjamin caught up to Rebecca just as she reached the parking garage. "Rebecca!" She stopped beside her car, but didn't turn around. For a few seconds, all he could hear was the sound of tires rolling across the concrete levels above them. "I forgot." "I know. I didn't mean to." "I know." He searched for another sentence. None of them felt big enough. Finally, she turned. "You didn't forget me tonight." Benjamin frowned. "What do you mean?" "You forgot me, little by little." The words settled between them. "I kept telling myself it was temporary," she said. "One busy season, one difficult year, one more problem." Benjamin lowered his eyes. "I thought I was doing all of this for us." "I know, and it wasn't enough." She looked at him for a long moment. "It stopped being about enough." Another pause. "I stopped believing tomorrow would be different." Benjamin nodded slowly. Not because he agreed, because he finally understood what she meant. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to." She unlocked her car. "I'm going home." "I'll meet you there." She gave one quiet nod before getting inside. They drove home separately. Neither arrived much earlier than the other. 11 years together had taught them the same roads. It couldn't teach them how to arrive in the same place. The porch light was still on. Rebecca's car already sat in the driveway. Benjamin hurried inside. "Rebecca?" A drawer closed upstairs. He climbed the stairs. Their bedroom door stood open. Rebecca was folding clothes into a suitcase. Not angrily, not hurriedly, carefully, as if she had been making this decision one small piece at a time for years. "What are you doing?" I'm leaving. His heartbeat stumbled. For tonight? For now. He stepped into the room. Rebecca. The apology he had rehearsed in his mind disappeared before it reached his mouth. She zipped the suitcase. I was angry a long time ago. She rested both hands on the handle. I'm tired now. Benjamin looked around the room. Everything appeared exactly the same. The framed photographs, the books, the blankets. Only now did he realize how fragile ordinary things could become. I'll fix this. She shook her head gently. You think tonight broke us. A pause. It didn't. She lifted the suitcase and walked toward the stairs. Benjamin followed. The kitchen lights were still on. 2 coffee mugs sat beside the sink from that morning. Rebecca stopped beside the dining table. Benjamin stood a few feet away. I'll pay you back. The sentence escaped before he could stop it. Rebecca looked at him. For what? For everything. A quiet sadness crossed her face. I didn't give you that money so you could pay me back. Silence. I gave it because I believed we were building one future. Benjamin leaned against the counter. I never wanted you to lose your dreams. I didn't lose them. She smiled faintly. I kept moving them. He closed his eyes. Every time you asked. She never said the words. She didn't have to. He remembered them himself. 1 more year. After the expansion. After the new warehouse. After the next contract. Always later. I thought we were making the same sacrifices. We were. She answered immediately. Then she looked around the kitchen. Until one day, she simply stopped speaking. Benjamin waited. She didn't finish the sentence. The silence finished it for her. He looked at the table where they had spent countless Thursday nights balancing bills. When did you stop telling me? Rebecca met his eyes. I didn't. He frowned. You didn't? I told you every Thursday. Benjamin stood perfectly still. She continued. You just stopped hearing it. Neither of them spoke again for several moments. Finally, Benjamin asked the only question he still had. What do I do now? Rebecca looked at him with tired, honest eyes. I don't know. Another pause. I've been trying to answer that by myself for years. She picked up the suitcase. Benjamin followed her to the front door. Rebecca. She rested one hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, she said quietly, I loved helping you build your dream. A breath passed between them. I just didn't realize mine had quietly become optional. Then she opened the door. The cool night air drifted inside. She walked away without looking back. Benjamin watched until her car disappeared at the end of the street. The house felt impossibly still. His phone buzzed. Another congratulatory message about the speech. He unlocked the screen. His thumb moved to Rebecca's name. Drive safely. He stared at the words, then slowly deleted them. The message had arrived too late. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. As he turned toward the kitchen, he noticed the paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. Inside sat a single cinnamon roll. Untouched, he smiled despite himself. Rebecca always insisted she wanted the smaller half. He had always pretended to believe her. He closed the bag. When he opened the refrigerator, a handwritten note caught his eye. Heat for 2 minutes. Don't overcook it again. He rested his hand against the refrigerator door. Ordinary handwriting. An ordinary reminder. Why did that hurt more than anything she'd said? As he replaced the note beneath the magnet, an old lake brochure slipped to the floor. He bent to pick it up. The edge caught the kitchen drawer. It slid open. Inside lay the old budgeting notebook. He picked it up. Mortgage payments, utility bills, savings goals. Small jokes squeezed into the margins to make difficult months feel lighter. Several envelopes slipped onto the table. Graduate school acceptance letters, different years, different dates, each marked in Rebecca's handwriting with the same single word, later. Benjamin sat down heavily. When did I become someone she had to wait for? The question escaped into the empty kitchen. No answer came. He carried the notebook and the letters into the home office. The original business plan rested on the bottom shelf. Rebecca's blue ink notes filled the margins. Questions, corrections, encouragement. One sentence had been underlined twice. People don't invest in businesses first. They invest in people. Benjamin closed the folder. His eyes drifted toward the framed bank deposit hanging on the wall. He had looked at it almost every day for 11 years. Tomorrow morning, he would finally see it. Benjamin never made it to bed. Morning arrived anyway. The kitchen looked exactly as it had the night before. The brass keychain, the old warehouse key, the budgeting notebook, the graduate school letters, the paper bag from the bakery. Nothing had moved. His phone buzzed again. Another congratulatory message about the anniversary dinner. He turned it face down. For the first time in years, success felt strangely disconnected from the life waiting inside the house. The coffee maker switched on automatically. Rebecca had programmed it months ago because he always forgot. Benjamin reached into the cabinet. Without thinking, he took out 2 mugs. He placed one on the counter, then stopped. Slowly, he returned it to the shelf. He couldn't remember the last morning they had actually finished coffee together. He remembered hundreds of mornings when she'd handed him a mug while he rushed out the door. He had mistaken proximity for time together. Carrying his coffee toward the hallway, he paused in front of the family photographs. He usually walked past them without slowing down. This morning, he looked, really looked. The first apartment, the warehouse, their 5th anniversary. Rebecca, laughing beside a banner at a community health fundraiser. He frowned. He remembered promising he'd come after a client meeting. He remembered calling. "I'm running late." Rebecca had answered almost immediately. "It's okay. Drive safely." He never went. The next morning, she asked how his presentation had gone. She never mentioned the fundraiser again. He had always taken that as understanding. Now it looked more like resignation. He continued into the living room. A ceramic lighthouse rested on the bookshelf. He smiled automatically. Then, another memory surfaced. Rebecca hadn't bought it for them. She'd bought it after taking the coastal trip alone. He had canceled the night before because an investor unexpectedly flew into town. When she returned, she'd handed him the lighthouse. "Now you've been there too." He had laughed. He had never once asked whether she'd enjoyed the weekend. The phone rang. "Carl." Benjamin answered. "You home?" "Yeah." "You sleep?" "No." Carl let the silence sit for a moment. "You know something I noticed years ago?" Benjamin waited. "When Rebecca talked about the company." Another pause. "She always said, 'we.'" Benjamin closed his eyes. "Last night, you never used that word once." Benjamin searched his memory. Carl was right. "I didn't even hear myself." "I know." Carl's voice remained gentle. "That's why I'm telling you now." After the call ended, Benjamin remained where he was, not thinking about the speech, thinking about one small word, "we." He wandered toward the front hallway. An old umbrella leaned inside the closet. The leather wrapping around the handle had started to fade. Rebecca had repaired it instead of replacing it. He remembered teasing her. "It's only an umbrella." She smiled. "It carried us through our first storm." He hadn't understood she was talking about far more than the weather. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten. Back in the kitchen, he opened the bakery bag. The cinnamon roll had gone cold. He tore off a small piece. Another Thursday morning came back to him. Rebecca insisting she wanted the smaller half. Him pretending to believe her. No anniversary, no celebration, just an ordinary breakfast. Somehow, that memory hurt more than the speech. He leaned against the counter. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full, full of conversations interrupted by phone calls, weekends postponed, promises answered with, "after this project." He had spent years believing he was sacrificing the present to secure the future. Standing there, he wondered when the future had quietly become permission to miss the life they were already living. His eyes drifted toward the home office. The framed bank deposit hung on the wall beyond the doorway. He had looked at it almost every working day for 11 years. This morning, he walked toward it for a different reason. Not to remember how the company survived, to understand what it had cost. Benjamin stood inside the office. Awards, photographs, certificates. For years, they had all told the same story. Or so he believed. His gaze settled on the framed deposit. Rebecca had insisted on framing it. He remembered laughing. Who frames a bank receipt? She'd smiled. So we never forget where we started. He lifted it from the wall. For the first time, he read every line instead of looking only at the amount. Then his eyes stopped. Account holder, Rebecca Carter. He stared at the name. Read it again, and again. He lowered the frame onto the desk. A memory surfaced. The warehouse. Unpaid invoices. Payroll due the next morning. Rebecca placing an envelope on the desk. We'll figure it out. He remembered, refusing. She pushed it back. We're married. He had said the same words he repeated the night before. I'll pay you back. She'd smiled. You don't understand. At the time he thought she meant the business. Now he wasn't so sure. Benjamin opened the bottom drawer. The original startup folder lay inside. Behind the framed receipt was a withdrawal slip. Same date, same amount. Rebecca's personal savings account. Almost emptied. His breathing slowed. He couldn't remember asking how much she was giving up. He couldn't remember asking what dreams that money had been holding. A folded note slipped from the file. Rebecca's handwriting. Only one sentence. If this gives us one more chance, it's enough. Benjamin read it 3 times. Not once did it mention ownership, or repayment, or the company. Only another chance. He rested the note beside the framed receipt. For 11 years, he had believed this frame celebrated the day his business survived. Now he saw something entirely different. It marked the day his wife quietly placed the future she wanted into the hands of the future they hoped to build together. He sat in silence. The office looked exactly the same. Nothing in it meant the same thing anymore. Benjamin remained in the office until the sunlight shifted across the floor. The framed deposit, Rebecca's note, the withdrawal slip. He read them again. Nothing changed. Neither did the question that refused to leave him. How had he lived beside this for 11 years without ever seeing it? His phone vibrated. Carl, Benjamin answered. You still at home? Yeah. I figured. Carl didn't ask any more questions. I'll stop by. 20 minutes later, the front door opened. Carl stepped inside carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He looked around the quiet house. Feels strange without her. Benjamin nodded. It does. Carl handed him a cup. Neither man drank from it. They sat at the kitchen table, where the budgeting notebook still lay open. Carl looked down at it. I remember these. Benjamin frowned. You do? Carl smiled faintly. Rebecca used to bring it to the warehouse every Thursday. Benjamin looked up. What? When payroll was tight, she'd sit right there in the break room after work. Carl rested a hand on the notebook. She'd ask questions nobody else thought to ask. Benjamin stared at him. She never told me that. Carl looked surprised. I assumed you knew. Silence settled over the table. Carl continued. She wasn't trying to run the company. A pause. She was trying to keep the pressure off you. Benjamin lowered his eyes to the notebook. Every page suddenly felt heavier. I've been thinking about something, Benjamin said. Carl waited. I always believed I was carrying everything. He let out a quiet breath. I never stopped to ask who was carrying me. Carl didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the hallway leading to the home office. You remember that winter when the bank almost pulled the credit line? Benjamin nodded. Barely. I remember Rebecca. Benjamin looked at him. She brought soup for everybody. Carl smiled. Not because we were hungry. He shook his head. Because she knew morale was disappearing. Benjamin tried to remember. He couldn't. I don't remember that day. I know. Carl's voice remained gentle. You were in meetings from sunrise until after dark. Another pause. She never blamed you for that. Benjamin looked away. No. Carl took a slow sip of coffee. But she hoped one day you'd ask what those years were like for her. The words landed without accusation. Benjamin leaned back in his chair. I never did. No. The room grew quiet again. Benjamin's eyes wandered across the kitchen. The refrigerator note. The bakery bag. The budgeting notebook. The graduate school letters. None of them looked extraordinary. That was exactly the point. One forgotten fundraiser. One canceled weekend. One delayed dream, one missed dinner, one broken promise followed by another promise to make it up later. None of them had ended the marriage. Together, they had changed it. Benjamin rubbed a hand across his face. I kept thinking I was building a future. Carl nodded. You were. Benjamin looked up, but somewhere along the way. He stopped. The words came more slowly now. I started treating the future like it mattered more than the present. Carl didn't interrupt. Benjamin continued. And every time I said, after this project, he looked around the house. I was asking her to wait one more time. His voice barely carried across the table. I didn't even realize I was asking. Carl rested both hands around his coffee cup. You know what I think? Benjamin looked at him. I think Rebecca believed you every single time. A long silence followed, until she couldn't anymore. Benjamin stood and walked into the home office. Carl stayed where he was. On the wall, a lighter rectangle marked the place where the framed deposit had hung. Benjamin looked at the empty space, then at the receipt resting on his desk. Beside it lay Rebecca's handwritten note. If this gives us one more chance, it's enough. He traced the words with his eyes. Not because he hadn't understood them before, because he finally did. He had spent 11 years believing Rebecca invested in his company. She hadn't. She had invested in the life they promised each other before there was ever a company to save. Benjamin folded the note carefully and returned it to the folder, not to hide it, to protect it. When he looked up again, the empty spot on the wall caught his attention. For years, the framed deposit had been the first thing he saw when he entered the office. Tomorrow, he decided, it would not go back there. Some reminders didn't belong on walls. They belonged where they could never be overlooked again. 3 months passed. The company continued growing. Clients still called. Deadlines still arrived. The difference was that Benjamin no longer believed every problem deserved the same answer. Thursday evening was blocked on his calendar. Every week, no exceptions. The first time an investor asked to move a meeting to Thursday night, Benjamin looked at his schedule before answering. I'm available Friday morning. The investor hesitated. We're flying out Thursday. Benjamin nodded. Then Friday we'll have to work. The meeting was moved. He didn't tell anyone why. He simply closed his laptop at 5 o'clock and drove home. The habit repeated itself the following week. And the week after that, people stopped asking him to stay late on Thursdays because they already knew the answer. Rebecca had rented a small apartment across town. It wasn't far from the university. She hadn't moved back. She hadn't promised that she would. Some evenings they had dinner together. Some weeks they only exchanged a few text messages about practical things. The distance no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Space for both of them to decide what came next. Benjamin didn't ask when she was coming home. He had learned that some questions couldn't be answered with a deadline. One Saturday afternoon, Rebecca invited him over, not for a conversation, to help carry a second-hand bookshelf she had found online. The apartment was bright but modest. Boxes still lined one wall. Benjamin lifted one end of the bookshelf. You sure this goes here? Rebecca looked around the room. A little to the left. He adjusted it. She stepped back. Perfect. Neither of them mentioned the anniversary, or the speech, or the night she left. They talked about paint colors, the noisy neighbor upstairs, a coffee shop she had discovered near campus, ordinary conversation. Benjamin realized how much he had missed hearing about the parts of Rebecca's life that had nothing to do with him. Before he left, he noticed a stack of graduate school brochures on the kitchen counter. He didn't pick one up. Instead, he asked, Have you decided? Rebecca smiled faintly. I'm still thinking. He nodded. If you want someone to look over your application essay. Oh, she looked at him. I know. That was all. No promises. No pressure. He left a few minutes later. The acceptance email arrived 2 weeks after that. Rebecca called him, not because she needed permission, not because she needed reassurance. She simply wanted to tell someone who had known that dream from the beginning. I got in. Benjamin smiled before she finished the sentence. I knew you would. There was a pause. I almost didn't apply. I know. I kept wondering if it still made sense. He looked out the office window. "I'm glad you decided it did." She laughed softly. "So am I." The semester began in September. Benjamin showed up on the first morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Rebecca looked surprised. "You remembered. You have an 8 o'clock seminar." She raised an eyebrow. "You remembered that too?" He smiled. "You mentioned it once." She accepted the coffee. Neither of them hurried toward the classroom. They stood outside the building for a minute, watching students cross the campus. Rebecca looked different, not because she had changed, because she looked like someone moving toward her own future again. Benjamin noticed, and this time, he didn't let the moment pass without paying attention. As she turned toward the entrance, she looked back. "Thank you for the coffee." Benjamin smiled. "I'll see you after class." He didn't offer to wait. He didn't ask how long she'd be. He simply let her go. For the first time in years, supporting Rebecca didn't mean standing in front of her dreams. It meant making room for them. Graduate school was harder than Rebecca remembered. The reading never seemed to end. Group projects appeared with almost no warning. Some nights she looked at the clock and realized midnight had come and gone without her noticing. For the first time in years, her calendar belonged to her. It was exhausting. It was wonderful. One Thursday evening, she sat at her apartment table, surrounded by articles, notebooks, and highlighted pages. Her laptop chimed. A message from Benjamin. "I'm at the grocery store. Anything you need?" Rebecca smiled. She thought for a moment before typing. "Coffee. The dark roast this time." A minute later, another message appeared. "Already in the cart." She set her phone down and returned to reading. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Somehow, it stayed with her the rest of the evening. A few weeks later, Benjamin stopped by after work. He carried 2 grocery bags in one hand, the dark roast coffee in the other. "I remembered." Rebecca opened the door wider. He set everything on the kitchen counter. Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. It no longer felt uncomfortable. It simply felt familiar. Benjamin noticed a draft paper lying beside her laptop. He glanced toward it, then looked back at her. "Want another pair of eyes?" Rebecca studied him for a second. "You'll tell me if it needs work?" He smiled. "I'll tell you where I got confused." She handed him the paper, not because she couldn't do it alone, because she trusted him to help without taking over. Benjamin sat at the table and read every page carefully. When he finished, he looked up. "I have one question." Rebecca waited. "On page 4. He pointed to a paragraph. "I don't think this sounds like you." She laughed. "It doesn't." "I thought so." She crossed out the paragraph without hesitation. "You know," she said, "you used to edit business proposals like this." Benjamin nodded. "I remember. You never read my writing." He looked down at the pages in front of him. "I know." There was nothing else to add. The truth had already arrived. As autumn settled over the city, they found a rhythm neither of them tried to define. Some Saturdays, Benjamin came over to assemble inexpensive furniture she ordered online. Other weekends, Rebecca visited the house to pick up old books she'd left behind. They cooked simple dinners. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they barely talked at all. Neither of them rushed to give the relationship a label. What mattered was that neither of them felt they were carrying it alone anymore. Near the end of the semester, Rebecca received her first major research grade, 98. She stared at the number for several seconds before laughing to herself. Without thinking, she called Benjamin. He answered on the second ring. "Everything okay?" "I got my grade." "And?" "98. There was a brief silence. Then Benjamin laughed. "I knew it." "You did not." "I absolutely did." She shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "I was terrified." "I know." Another pause. "I'm proud of you." This time he didn't add anything else. He didn't mention sacrifices. He didn't mention second chances. He simply let the moment belong to her. That evening, Benjamin drove to her apartment. Not with flowers. Not with balloons. Not with a celebration planned. He carried one paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. Rebecca opened the door. He held up the bag. "I only bought one." She looked inside. A single cinnamon roll. She laughed. You finally figured it out. Benjamin smiled. You never wanted the smaller half. She looked at him for a long moment. No, I didn't. He broke the cinnamon roll in half. This time he handed Rebecca the larger piece without saying a word. She accepted it. Neither of them mentioned the years when she had quietly settled for less. Neither of them needed to. Some apologies aren't spoken. They're lived. They sat at the small kitchen table, sharing warm coffee and an ordinary dessert. Outside, students hurried across campus with backpacks slung over their shoulders. Inside, Rebecca talked about a research project she wanted to pursue the following semester. Benjamin listened. He asked questions, not because he was waiting for his turn to speak, because he genuinely wanted to know. As Rebecca answered, she caught herself smiling more than once. It wasn't because every wound had disappeared. It was because, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was speaking into the background of someone else's life. She felt heard, and Benjamin understood that listening wasn't the reward at the end of the story. It was the work that would keep the story going. 1 year later, Thursday arrived again. Benjamin stood in the kitchen before sunrise, measuring coffee into the machine. Outside, the neighborhood was still quiet. Inside, the house smelled the way it used to on budgeting nights. Only this time, there were no unpaid invoices waiting on the table, no business plans, no calculators, just 2 mugs, a laptop, a stack of graduate school articles. Rebecca walked into the kitchen, wearing one of Benjamin's old university sweatshirts. Her hair was still damp from the shower. She stopped when she saw the coffee already waiting. You've been up a while. I wanted to finish before you came down. She smiled. You remembered I have class. You have your presentation today. Rebecca laughed softly. I didn't tell you that this week. No. Benjamin slid the mug toward her. You told me 3 weeks ago. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The warmth settled into her fingers. So? Benjamin asked. Nervous? A little. You'll do well. She looked at him over the rim of the mug. You sound very sure. I've read the paper 4 times. You volunteered for that. I know, and corrected my citations. I noticed a few. She laughed again. The sound filled the kitchen more naturally than silence ever had. Rebecca opened her laptop. The final draft of her presentation waited on the screen. Benjamin pulled out the chair beside her, not across the table, beside her. She scrolled to the final page. What do you think? He read it carefully, not quickly, not while reaching for his phone, not while glancing at emails. When he finished, he looked back at her. I think your conclusion is stronger than your introduction. She narrowed her eyes. You've been spending too much time with graduate students. I've been spending time with you. She nudged his shoulder. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. She made 2 small edits. Saved the file. Then closed the laptop. Done. Benjamin stood. So? She raised an eyebrow. So? Breakfast? You cooked? I attempted. She laughed. I suddenly have questions. I expected that. 20 minutes later, they stood over a frying pan that had produced eggs that were slightly more done than either of them preferred. Rebecca reached over and turned off the burner. You still overcook things. I'm improving. She looked at him. You are. He wasn't sure whether she meant breakfast. He didn't ask. After they ate, Benjamin opened one of the kitchen drawers. Inside lay the old budgeting notebook. He carried it to the table. Rebecca looked at it for a moment. I haven't seen that in a while. I found it when I cleaned the office. He placed it between them. Neither of them opened it immediately. It had once held lists of bills they hoped they could pay, dreams they hoped they could afford, promises they hoped tomorrow would make easier. Benjamin finally turned to the last written page. The word Rebecca had written months earlier was still there. Our future. Below it, in his own handwriting. Together. He picked up a pen. What are you doing? I think. He smiled. It's time for a new page. He turned to a blank sheet. For a second, Neither of them wrote anything. Then Rebecca reached for the pen first. She wrote, "Fall semester." Benjamin smiled. "Practical. It needs to be." She handed him the pen. He added another line underneath, "Thursday dinner, protected." Rebecca looked at him. "No meetings?" "No meetings." "No exceptions?" "No exceptions." She studied him for another moment, not to see if he sounded convincing, to remember how consistency had slowly replaced promises. She took the pen back, added one final line, "Vacation after finals." Benjamin laughed. "I've already requested the week off." "You have?" "I did it 2 months ago." She looked at him in surprise. "You planned ahead." "I'm learning." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The gesture lasted only a few seconds. It didn't need to last longer. They left for the university together. The drive felt comfortably ordinary. Traffic lights, morning commuters, a weather report on the radio neither of them really listened to. Benjamin parked near the lecture hall. Rebecca gathered her notes. Before getting out, she looked at him. "Thank you." He smiled. "For what?" She thought about the question, then shook her head. "For paying attention." Benjamin didn't answer right away. He watched students crossing the campus with backpacks and coffee cups in their hands. Finally, he said, "I thought love was built by the big moments." Rebecca waited. "I was wrong." She smiled. "I know." She leaned over and kissed his cheek. "I'll see you after class." "I'll be here." She walked toward the building without looking back. Benjamin didn't call after her. He didn't need to. He simply watched until she disappeared through the doors. Then he reached into his pocket for his keys. The engraved keychain caught the morning sunlight. "Never forget where you started." He turned it over with his thumb. "Still our dream." He smiled to himself before slipping the keys back into his pocket. Years later, neither of them could remember what dessert had been served at the anniversary dinner, where everything seemed to fall apart. They remembered something else instead. The Thursday evenings that came afterward, because love had never disappeared in one forgotten speech. It had slowly been overshadowed by ordinary moments. And, in the end, it found its way home through ordinary moments too. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe a relationship can truly recover after years of being taken for granted? Or are there some moments that change everything forever? If this story reminded you that love is often protected in the smallest everyday choices, share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about love, family, second chances, and the moments that quietly shape our lives, don't forget to subscribe to Golden Thread Stories and turn on notifications. We'd love to have you with us for the next story. Until next time, take care of the people who matter most, and don't wait for a special occasion to let them know they're seen.